All right, last time, it seems like a very long time ago that we actually had class and a lecture. We talked about the second radical reconstruction. Somebody remind us what we mean by that. We actually finished it before the test, so the test could have been longer. Morgan and Stephanie and I think it was Caleb. Was he the last one in there with you? They would have missed chapel. But second radical reconstruction.
It's referring to back to the first one that was done after the Civil War.
Okay, where America was changed drastically. Okay, and this was an intentional attempt here by certain elements to change America. And this time it was trying to create a socialist state. I mean, some of these people are outright Marxists that are behind these things. And we talked about several different facets. The court system and how it began to make some really crazy rulings. We talked about just more of a direct frontal assault with the student uprisings and all of that. Then the revolt against authority. And then the civil rights movement took up a lot of this. And obviously that issue is one there's a lot of emotion involved there. And some real wrongs, but it is true that the leadership behind this thing was trying to ride this and change America completely. Lots of the people actually involved, they were fighting for getting rid of discrimination, and there were lots of whites who were fighting to maintain the position of discrimination. But there were elements that hijacked this thing and rode it to the end. And to me, one of the telling things is that after the Civil Rights Act, when all the problems are fixed, it should have been over, and we see things get more violent. So. All right, the next thing we want to do, and we're getting close to the end. That's all, front and back, but just that much. We're going to look at some of the presidents after World War II. Briefly run down through some of them, get eventually up to Ronald Reagan and talk about his approach to the Cold War. And jump from there to the War on Terror. I'll let you read about Bill Clinton. I don't want to talk about it in class. So. All right, Harry S. Truman, the first one. Harry Truman, Democrat. He's president from 45 to 53. Anybody know anything about Truman? You should know something at least. He was president, something else though.
He took over after Franklin Delano Roosevelt died.
Yeah.
He's the one with the famous picture of Dewey wins president.
Yes, the election was very close, and I think it's the Chicago Tribune or something actually ran that Dewey won, and so the next day when he won, he was holding up the paper, kind of laughing at it. So, all right, so he took over when Roosevelt died. He was actually the one who made the decision to drop the bomb. To give an idea of the secrecy involved, he didn't know about it. After Roosevelt dies, his advisors get him together and tell him about this small project that's on the back burner. So anyway, obviously he's brought up to speed about what's happening, and then he actually makes the final decision to drop the bomb. Which is, he's a Democrat. We got to at least give it to him. He was willing to use it. So, all right, a couple of things about him beyond that. Took over after FDR. He dropped the bomb. The war dominates his first term, and we'll mention a couple of things here in his second term that come up. The first is the fair deal. It was the fad here. You got to have your own special term for your social program, and his was the fair deal. This goes back prior to them, the square deal with Theodore Roosevelt and others, but fair deal. Really, it's just more of the same socialistic type programs from the Great Depression era. I can give you a couple of particulars in this one. The fair deal. Truman's words to describe it were this, which you don't have to write down: the welfare of the people against special privilege for the few. We still have that same rhetoric after 50-some years of this. You think we'd get it figured out, but it's never. That's why Bernie Sanders is still complaining that these people have unfair advantages. All right, here's a couple of types of things that came up in this fair deal, things that come through Congress as part of this. Federal aid for housing, the federal government giving assistance for people to get housing. That's scary. And you have all the efficiencies of the federal bureaucracy providing you with housing. So, all right, for federal aid to housing, increase in the minimum wage. And we're talking about just really astronomical numbers here. Went from 40 cents to 75. Now, you have to also adjust for inflation and other things here. But anyway, increase in minimum wage. There, California is, over the next several years, up in there is to 15. I'm sure this one. Chicago is going to 13.75, I think, by 2019.
All the fast food restaurants in those areas, due to the fact that they can't afford to hire people, are now developing computers that does everything for you, type in your order.
The kiosk, yeah. The order at a kiosk.
It's not efficient enough to have purchase up there.
And those people will complain about how evil McDonald's is. You know, they're greedy. They only want to make a profit. Which, you know, they are a business. They don't talk about the employees who are greedy and only want to make a profit. They should show up just because they want to serve humanity. But that never works. So anyway, increase in minimum wage. This has been a boondoggle for decades. Major newspapers used to write editorials about the correct minimum wage is zero. Right? And you know, that would be fun to read today. We've kind of come to accept this thing. It's a free market. If you don't like what your boss pays you, leave. Right? There are other employees. And if there aren't any other employees that will hire you, then you need to do something. Develop a skill that people will pay you for. All right. Anyway, it's a free market. I was just thinking of an example. Oh well. Around here, ride the train to Chicago and flip burgers for $13.75 an hour. Get a real job. It's still, people in Chicago still complain that people can't work at McDonald's and support a family. And that's exactly the solution. It's like you say, wait, McDonald's is for high school kids. Don't support a family at McDonald's. That should be the answer. But anyway. All right, so minimum wage increase, and it's gone on. It's continued on, and it still continues on. It'll go to $15 an hour in California, and that'll ripple across the country. And then in 20 years, when you guys are teaching this class, one of you, you'll be talking about, yeah, California just bumped the minimum wage to $25 an hour. I remember when I was in college, it was only going to 15. Right? It never fixes itself. All right? It's like trying to fill up a bucket of water, but you know, scooping water out of one side and pouring it in the other. You can go faster and faster, but it's not changing any.
Eventually, it'll be $5 instead of $1.
Yes. Yeah. All the prices will go up. Anyway. All right, minimum wage increase. We've got to stop. Increase Social Security benefits, the retirement program for the elderly. Stripping away of your personal responsibility to plan for your future. Your personal responsibility and really your ability when they take off 13% of your wages. It'd be kind of nice not to have that stripped away, you could say. All right, and also increased the amount of coverage of the FDIC insurance. The insurance of the deposits in a bank. You go put your paycheck from last week in the bank. Most of you, I think, would be covered by these numbers at this point. It went from $5,000 to $10,000. So if you made more than $10,000 and put that in the bank, at this point, it'll only give you back $10,000. So everybody's safe with the 10? It's close. Today, I think it's $150,000 or somewhere in that ballpark. So even with me gouging you guys and making you pay lots of money for college, I'm covered. So, all right. So anyway, that also has increased through the years. All right. Those things made it through Congress. There's a few pieces of legislation that didn't, and let me mention a couple of these. At least one that's interesting. National health insurance didn't make it. There's a call to have a national program to provide health insurance for everybody. Yeah. Truman, Obamacare has that ring to it. Truman. I'm sure we could come up with something, but it just doesn't have the ring to it. So that didn't make it. Federal aid to education didn't make it, where the federal government pays states to run their local school systems. That's commonplace today. A civil rights branch didn't make it. And one that's kind of surprising is more aid to farmers. They usually get whatever they want. They drag in the one farmer in Iowa that still has a family farm, And he stands there with his children around him with his straw hat. And he says, yeah, we got to help the farmer. And all of the other farmers who live in New York and, have their machinery run by satellite for them. They're rubbing their hands together. Yeah, let's give them so much per acre. And they're thinking, I've got millions of acres. So anyway, that did make it. Usually farmers get whatever they want to. And I'm not joking about many of those large farms are owned by people that don't even live in the area. There are I forget some of the news anchormen that own farms. And they'll talk about, we need subsidies for the farmers. And it's them they're talking about. So. All right, they own farms as an investment. They bought it as an investment. So, all right, so we get this fair deal, a new wave of socialist legislation. We weren't stupid enough to swallow all of it yet. Most of that stuff all of that stuff at this point now, we have been stupid enough to accept. So, one other thing with Truman to mention beyond the fair deal, his social program, is communist subversion. We have a massive communist infiltration of the United States. This really predates him. It goes back even before the war. But just massive. Let me just give you a couple examples. In 1949, there were 11 communist agents that were tried and convicted. If you want the particular thing, under a law called the Smith Act, and it made it a crime to advocate violently overthrowing the government. Okay, we had 11 communist agents convicted for that. We have people like Alger Hiss. He actually bubbles up before this time frame, but fits in here. One of the architects helping to form the United Nations. He was a communist spy. Whittaker Chambers, you might know that name. He was the spy that fingered Hiss. He was a communist agent, but he turned from it. And he explained once about why he left communism. His phrase was, one night he heard screams. That was his phrase. And here's a little bit longer quote. What communist has not heard those screams? They come from husbands torn forever from their wives in midnight arrests. They come muffled from the execution cellars of the secret police, from torture chambers in the Lubinka, from the citadels of terror now stretching from Berlin to Canton. They come from those freight cars loaded with men, women, and children, the enemies of the communist state, locked in, packed in, left on remote sidings to freeze to death in the Russian winter. So he said one night, those, I think figuratively speaking, he heard the screams. But one night he began to be aware of this, and he leaves communism. So Whittaker Chambers, he turns in some other fights. He famously went to a pumpkin patch, and there was a spot where they were leaving documents. So he said, I'm a spy. And he said, let me show you. And he goes to the pumpkin patch and retrieves information. So, all right, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, they get tried for treason in 1951 for leaking the nuclear bomb secrets to the Soviet Union. He was an engineer on the project. They get executed, at least, so it's... There's got to be some slogan there. The family that prays together stays together. The family that get executed together. Dies together. Oh, there we go. Even has a ring to it. All right. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were tried. There have, in the last, at least in 93 and even since then, there have been... They've been retried. They'll have a kind of like a mock trial and bring out the evidence, and they've been found guilty multiple times later by liberals who defended them. But really, all that changed in '95. All the liberals tried to deny that all of this spying took place. In '95, anybody know what would have changed in the Soviet world by '95? Think of the Cold War. Some of you need to. Drool on your laptop. What happens by 95? She wasn't going to sleep. I just timeline. I know the test was a couple days ago, so it's
95.
It happens by 95. Olivia's getting desperate. starts in 46. Cold War ends, Soviet Union collapses, all right? And then all of their documentation over the next couple of years starts to come out, and we begin to see things. They start releasing documents. And these people were spies. They were in there, they have them recorded as their spies. All right. So anyway, liberals for a long time said, oh, this, McCarthy and all those people, which is the next thing to mention here. There's just crazy people on a witch hunt. Really, after we see all the Soviet records, McCarthy was wrong. He underestimated. Right? It was worse than we were saying. So, all right, let me give you one more name here at least. Joseph McCarthy. He was a senator from Wisconsin. He ran a series of hearings investigating communist activity. And he gets maligned in the media. Now he, to his credit, or discredit, whatever, he sometimes wasn't the smoothest guy, often a little bit rough, maybe like a Donald Trump approach to a question he didn't like in the media. So, sometimes he didn't help himself out. But he gets maligned, eventually gets denounced by the Senate as being out of control, just made to look horrible. He's on this witch hunt, accusing everybody of being communist. And later on, we find out that this was all true. So, I have an interesting little note here I forgot about. In 1943, we broke the Soviet code that they communicated with, and we kept it a secret. So all during this time, where everybody's saying MacArthur's this crazy man, there were people in our military that knew better, but they couldn't say anything because it would reveal that we knew the code. So anyway, after the Soviet Union collapsed and all this stuff comes out, they do release that stuff. But massive communist infiltration, right? Not just under Truman, but he and Roosevelt before him especially did very little. Some of these guys they were informed about and they ignored it or gave them promotions or they did very little about it. So, all right, next president, Dwight Eisenhower. We've got to go faster than this. Dwight Eisenhower, he's the next one. He's president from 53 to 61, serves 2 terms, and he's a Republican. And for him, we'll look at domestic and foreign affairs like we've done with some other presidents, go back to that format. Couple of things with domestic affairs. The first one is the economy. He believed in a free economy, and he made a lot of effort to pull back some of these regulations, getting rid of rent controls. There was still a Defense Production Act that was regulating the production of things in America, what the factories were produced. So it does a lot to begin stripping off some of these controls that date back to the wartime things. So push for a free economy. Okay. He also, still with domestic affairs, appointed Earl Warren to the Supreme Court. Anybody know that name? We talked about him last class period.
The Warren Court?
The Warren Court, yeah. Appoints him October of 53. The guy had previously been the Attorney General of California and then the Governor of California as a Republican. Gets nominated to the courts and became this crazy liberal with some just amazing decisions, amazingly bad decision. So Eisenhower described appointing Warren as the biggest mistake he ever made. It was just a very bad decision. But anyway, that comes from a Republican guy. That gives a grain of salt to people that say we've got to get the right president in so we can get the right judges on the courts. The Republicans don't have a real good track record. The guy who agreed with Obamacare was a Republican appointee, Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice. So, all right, so we have Warren to the Supreme Court. We also have underneath him some issues coming up with segregation of schools. Let me mention a couple of things about that. We have underneath, while he was president, the decision that said separate but equal facilities were unconstitutional. You couldn't have segregated schooling. You couldn't have a black school and a white school. I wonder if they picked different colors, like the kids who got sunburnt had to go to a different school. But anyway, couldn't have separate facilities. That was declared unconstitutional. That was 57. And then in the aftermath of that, we mentioned this in passing with the Civil Rights Act, we have the incident in Arkansas where the governor was refusing to allow a school to be integrated. And we have the Arkansas 9, these 9 black students that the National Guard came out and escorted them to school to make sure the governor didn't stop them. They didn't follow them into school, but just escorted them to school. I've often thought what they thought about it. You can imagine, having the National Guard come out to make sure that the state police didn't prevent you from getting into school, and you're the only 9 black kids in the entire building. And the National Guard doesn't go in with you. I've often thought they might have traveled at a group and never gone to the restroom for the entire day. They would never be by themselves. So, but anyway, we can't discount those students. That would have not have been an easy thing to do. But that took place under him. He wasn't, him directly in charge of it, but underneath him. So, all right, a couple of foreign affairs things with him. All right, first involves the Suez Canal. The canal down here connecting the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. Very important for transportation and shipping and things like that. Not as significant today because a lot of ships today are too large to go through it anyway. But at that point, very, very significant. There was a crisis there. Egypt started making steps to take over the canal. It had been under the control of the British for a very long time. They began to try to take control over it. If you want, a man, President Nasser of Egypt, was making moves here to try to take control of this and claim it for Egypt. And lots of countries respond. I mean, this is it's a significant thing here for all kinds of reasons. Lots of countries respond. The United Nations, for what it's worth, begins to invade it. Israel begins to invade, etc. Eventually, it's backed down, and it doesn't end up in a full-scale war, but it does head that direction. We come in, and not so much with military, but we come in and kind of say, enough is enough. We had the firepower and the might to try to impose our will. So there was a crisis there on the Suez Canal area. It was while he was president. I don't have a date, sorry. 53 to 61. All right, also underneath, let's go. One more thing for him is the Congo, the situation in the Congo, the Belgian Congo. This place in 1960 had been set free of its control by Belgium, but it was very, very unstable. There was not one doctor, one engineer, or one lawyer amongst the native population, right? And they were set free. So again, not to say there was 2, but it'd be like taking our 5th and 6th graders and putting them on an island by themselves and saying, all right, you guys have a good time. They were not prepared for it. So this thing very quickly turns into chaos and violence. The Soviets here, like they did many places, came down and wanted to help, get some technical assistance, provide stability. They were trying to get communism infiltrated there. So eventually it does get extremely ugly. The UN Secretary General ends up getting killed there in a plane crash. There's about 4 years of fighting that takes place. So it really never settles down. It's the Republic of the Congo eventually, and then Zaire today, still very, very unstable. But anyway, the Congo becomes, at that point, was a major issue. All right, JFK, next president. John Fitzgerald Kennedy. 61 to 63, a Democrat. And you might guess from him only serving 2 years that things don't go very well for somebody. Either he took over for somebody that died or he's the one that died. So he's the one that dies. All right, a couple of things about him. He won an extremely close election. The popular vote, which really is not doesn't count for anything except it looks good in the news, was about 120,000 spread out of about 70 million votes. Right? So it was very, very close. So remember that next time people say, oh, we've never had an election like this before. All right, that means you're talking to somebody who thinks you're an idiot, or they're an idiot, okay? Because even the stuff we're having today is nothing. And they're talking, Donald Trump saying, if they don't pick me, then the whole system is corrupt. I think it was Coolidge, not Coolidge. One of the Republican presidents wasn't even at the convention. They were fighting over who of the people that had come that said they wanted to be president, and they finally said, what about this guy over here? Let's make him president. He hadn't even been running. All right, so they talk about this is unprecedented and it's never happened before. And that guy won back then. So don't listen to liberals when they tell us things. But anyway, this election was extremely close. There was major cheating in Chicago. I know that's surprising. Major cheating in Chicago that really becomes the tipping point in this thing. Nixon loses this thing and he decides not to contest it. Al Gore was not as gracious when there wasn't really cheating, but major cheating in Chicago that tips Illinois in Kennedy's favor. All right, a couple of domestic things about him that come up. The first is his program. All the cool presidents have their own social program. It tells us something about Eisenhower. Those stiff Republicans can't have any fun. All right, his was the New Frontier. And it's more of the same type of stuff. We're not going to go down through a list of things, but more of the same type of stuff here. More social programs, more spending on this, more spending on that, increasing the minimum wage, increasing the amount of FDIC coverage, expanding Social Security, just more of the same type of stuff, more liberalism than there. All right, second thing here with domestic issues is that the economy runs through a recession while he's in office. In 1961, there's a very significant dip that takes place. And a lot of the usual responses take place. Congress begins spending money. They spent $5 billion on housing, et cetera. All the usual socialist answers. But Kennedy pushed for something else that's kind of remarkable. He pushed for a tax cut. Every now and then Republicans will trot Kennedy out and play quotes of him talking about cutting taxes. All right, and the Democrats say, that's not fair. He's our president. But he called for tax cuts. Kind of a surprising response. An economist at the time who heard Kennedy speaking said this. He said it was the most Republican speech since William McKinley, since the late 1800s, that speech about cutting taxes. So, all right, so we do get some tax cuts. We also, underneath him, have some issues with school prayer coming up. I mean, we pray in school here, but in public schools it is now illegal. Somehow because the Constitution says Congress can't make a state religion, so that means we can't pray in school. If that makes sense to you, it shouldn't. All right, but anyway, it's illegal. There were some Supreme Court decisions that did this, Engel versus Vitale and some others. The banned praying in school, banned reading the Bible in school, all these types of things. One of the principal people behind it was a lady named Madeleine Murray O'Hair, O-H-A-I-R, O'Hair. She was a straight atheist, a Marxist. She used her son, who was in the school, as the vehicle to get these cases going out of Baltimore. Her son later gets saved and becomes an evangelist. In 1980, he wrote a letter apologizing in Baltimore. First, I would like to apologize to the people of Baltimore for whatever part I played in the removal of Bible reading and prayer from the public schools of that city. So imagine his mom rolled over in her grave. So. But anyway, that school prayer issue, that comes up here under Kennedy. All right, a couple of foreign affairs things to mention, just that they happened here. We talked about them with the Cold War, but to put them under the right president in your mind at least. The Bay of Pigs was him. The Berlin Wall was him. He didn't build it, but he allowed it. Said nothing about it. Those are both in 1961. April and August of 61. And then in 62, thinking that Khrushchev thinking he had stumbled upon an imbecile as the American president, and he might have been right, we have the Cuban Missile Crisis. All right, that was October of 62, prior to the midterm election. All right, and then two more things here. I guess I did say domestic, foreign affairs, whatever. Two more things. He gets assassinated in 1963, Daley Plaza in Dallas, Texas. And he gets assassinated. Okay, don't, there are lots of conspiracies. If you want to entertain yourself, you can look up some of the crazy conspiracies. I don't have the number here in front of me, but if I remember right, it was about a 75-yard shot. When it talks about he's using open sights, shooting a moving target. But if you've shot a gun before, imagine 75 yards, trained Marine. It wasn't like he just picked up a gun and said, which way do I point it? He knew what he was doing. And the car was moving almost directly away from him, which for shooting means it's a still target. I mean, it's not like he's tracking Kennedy across like he's shooting a clay pigeon or something, moving directly away from him. So not especially a difficult shot for somebody who knows what they're doing. So he did it all by himself. A crazy man. It is fun to read the conspiracy sometimes, though. I thought it'd be fun to get an aerial view of the plaza and pinpoint every place that people think there were guns shooting at the president. I mean, it's this crossfire of, that people say there's snipers on 3 or 4 different buildings. Some people think there's a guy in the storm sewer that shot him. Some people think it was the guy in the car behind him who just accidentally fired his rifle and happened to hit the president in the head. I can talk about a bad day at work. They have the famous smoking gun on the grassy knoll. There are guns all over the place. But really, those are crazy conspiracies. It was Lee Harvey Oswald there in 63. So, all right, last thing for Kennedy is he was a filthy, womanizing pig. All right, I have it this way. He was well known for not being faithful to his wife. Filthy, womanizing pig. One of the mafia guys who was immoral with Marilyn Monroe was famous for making a comment about helping her boyfriend become president when he was a pig. There's no way around it. Very, very unfaithful. And even not really argue that he wasn't today. Some people say, well, he wasn't with Marilyn Monroe that many times. But okay, you can see the point at that. So anyway, very, very unfaithful to his wife. And it's very irritating that they bring up, they attack Cruz, trying to claim he's been unfaithful to his wife. And I really don't think he has been, but it's no big deal if the Democrats are. I mean, it's a badge of honor. I'm a great Democrat. But the Republicans, they're held to a different standard. All right, let's quickly hit Johnson. Lyndon Baines Johnson. He takes over when Kennedy dies, serves through 69, another Democrat. He faces election for a second term. He finishes out Kennedy's and then runs and wins another term. In that election, he faced a man named Barry Goldwater. Anybody know that name? Goldwater loses, right? But this election really is the beginnings of what we think of as conservatism. Goldwater's an extremely conservative guy. Reagan gives a speech in favor of Goldwater, switching parties, and really becomes a national figure at this point. But anyway, the election is not even close. Johnson wins 61% of the electoral votes, or the popular vote, wins 486 to 52 of the electoral votes. So not even a close election. He gets blasted away. But we do get a lot of the conservative movement coming out of this. Goldwater did some things like this, and I'm going to ruin my time here. He gave a speech in front of a senior citizens group denouncing Social Security, which is true. I mean, it's not. But here we have people who are living on Social Security, and he's saying, let's get rid of the whole program. It's stupid. He talked about defoliating the jungles of Vietnam with nuclear weapons, which, he's meaning that, let's win the war. Forget this back and forth stuff. Let's win the war. But maybe not the best word choice for an election. Anyway, he loses, but Goldwater, the Goldwater campaign is a very pivotal moment for Reagan and really the start of what we think of as a conservative movement. It starts a wave of activity. So, all right, quickly for him, his domestic program, again, he's one of the cool presidents. His is the Great Society. We have an opportunity to move not only toward the rich society, but upward to the Great Society. Everybody uplifted now? You are more uplifted than anybody at that point. So there's another wave of legislation. He is able to push through 89 different bills through Congress. More of the same type of stuff. And it's a complete failure. Complete failure. And Johnson, when he decided not to run, admits it. He could have ran for another term. He said, I tried to make it possible for every child of every color to grow up in a nice house, eat a solid breakfast, to attend a decent school, and to get a good and lasting job. He's forgetting the fact that all of that is dependent upon parents who do their job, not the government, but that's beside the point. I ask so little in return, just a little thanks, just a little appreciation. That's all. Remember, this is 60s, mid-60s, late 60s. But look at what I got instead. Riots, looting, burning, shootings, young people by the thousands leaving universities, marching in the streets, chanting that horrible song about how many kids I'd killed that day. It ruined everything. So anyway, his program was a complete failure by his estimation. All right, so the Great Society also starts what he called the War on Poverty. I want him to declare war on me if he's going to do the same type of thing. This was the Economic Opportunity Act of '64, government spending all over the place supposedly to eradicate poverty. Didn't work. All right, one other thing, a couple of things here to mention. Neil Armstrong lands on the moon in '69. We haven't talked about that yet. The moon landing, July the 20th of '69. That's one small step for man. One giant leap for mankind. Or at least they had a very nice looking sound stage where they took pictures. All right, anyway, that was '69. My dad at least believed the story. He went home and watched the news and they had the pictures of it on there. So it's very well done. All right, and then Johnson also, his foreign affairs at least is dominated by Vietnam. He's the one that escalates it. The Tonkin Resolution we mentioned where the full-scale involvement was justified. It was him. He ramps it up to about 500,000 people involved. So when the Democrats start talking about quagmires, they know what they're talking about. Okay, they have created them. All right, we will have to continue next time.